Gone unchallenged long enough.
Now the journey ends here, at the edge of a warrior's blade, in the final battle for Middle-earth, under the shadow of Mount Doom.
Come to speak. The third movie combines the strengths of the first two movies in a really good way and takes it another step. And as in any good story, just before it gets better, it gets a lot worse.
But these are extraordinary times that the Gandalf and the rest are living through. And extraordinary demands are made on people's spirit. Can they survive? Can they live up to their responsibilities?
Become who you were born to be.
I can't wait for fans to be able to go into the theater and actually sit down and not have to deal with to be continued.
The men have found their captain. You have given us hope.
I think it's like any relationship, you know, the relationship that the audience has towards the characters, it only grows. How do you feel about someone in the first year you know them, and then how do you feel knowing them after 3 years?
I need you on my side. I'm on your side, Mr. Frodo. I know, Sam.
And in a sense, because it's the climax, it is the reason why you make the first two films. You know, you make the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers because you want to get to the Return of the King. That's the whole point. The Return of the King, in being the climax, is naturally the most emotional of the three, because the journeys that these characters have been going on, what they care about, what they've been fighting for, even what some of their friends have died for, is all leading to the events that are taking place in this film.
With the overwhelming success of his Lord of the Rings trilogy, Peter Jackson has become a household name. So it's hard to remember that when New Line Cinema announced he would take the helm of the biggest production in movie history, most people asked, Peter who?
Peter Jackson has amazing energy and determination and willpower. And you might underestimate him, that untidy hair and those large glasses. But I wouldn't have him any other way than he is, and it makes me smile just thinking about him.
Here we're going to have the catapults firing, boulders swinging in and crashing.
I think over the course of the three films and all of the principal photography, the thing that struck me most about Peter was his ability to maintain first his energy and his enthusiasm, as well as his ability to never lose sight of where these films were going.
Quick! To the river! Okay, cut it! Thank you, guys. Do one more, thank you. As you're immediately turning, so it's like, okay. You know, it's kind of like you kind of keep your eyes on them as long as you can. Right.
Peter has the philosophy that each day should be taken one step at a time, but each step to perfection. Ultimately, you'll never quite reach perfection, but if you aim for it and hope to gain it, it motivates you to a higher level.
The more will come should sound like, you know, you're prepared to wait another 2 or 3 days. You know, I mean, really, when you say...
He definitely has the ability to add that one comment or a suggestion that will make it work completely for that given moment or that interaction between characters.
We have till dawn, then we must ride. It's almost like one continuous thought, isn't it, really?
And it's hard to have that sort of attention to detail over such a long period.
More will come.
Every hour lost hastens Gondor's defeat.
We have till dawn, then we must ride.
I think for Peter, he enjoys battle sequences. The greater the scale and the numbers of combatants, the better.
But yet, at the core of it, it's the most tiny emotional journey that all these characters that you've got to know are all taking.
I offer you my service, Theoden King.
So in the middle of this greatest war, you have all these characters making their paths through it.
I think that what's great with this story is that it's been a balance of both the epic and the personal. the Battle of Pelennor Fields taking place with millions of people on this massive plain. And in the foreground, there were two little figures climbing this mountain.
The Return of the King really does centre on the last leg of Frodo and Sam's journey to Mount Doom. And it focuses in particular on the emotional impact that this is having.
Frodo is starting to fade, and the darkness of the ring is starting to have a much more powerful and obvious effect. And Sam is the one thing that's actually keeping Frodo going.
Especially by the third film, Sam really has to struggle with figuring out what it means to help Frodo.
A struggle that's all the more difficult with the presence of Gollum.
Precious will be ours. Once the hobbits are dead.
The more pain and suffering Frodo endures, the closer Gollum is to getting what he really wants, and the more treacherous and threatening he is.
I think it becomes most evident in Return of the King that Frodo would not be able to get to Mordor and would not be able to actually complete his task of destroying this ring without Sam.
And in our own way, I think that we would like to behave as Frodo and Sam do. We would hope that if we found ourselves in a situation that somewhere we'd get the courage to do what they do.
For the cast and crew, working on The Lord of the Rings was like completing a marathon. For Peter, the start of the race was so long ago, it's no more than a distant memory.
But the phone call to my agent that I made to inquire about the rights to Lord of the Rings was 1995. It was November 1995. So how long is that? That's 8 years, actually. Oh, it's 8 years. I thought it was only 7. Hey, time flies when you're having fun.
It could be said that Peter's journey to Middle-earth really began at age 18.
Lord of the Rings was a book that I was aware of, but I had never actually read it. And so I must admit, I mean, I read the book and I thought, wow, this will make a great film. I can't wait till it comes out. You know, I can't wait till somebody else makes it. And that was as far as my kind of thinking went at that stage. I never ever dreamt it would be me doing it, not in a million years.
We're over here is raking along the front row here, so if we can get...
People talk about the scope of the film, but you know, I guess the big question is what's bigger than big? I mean, I stopped thinking about the scale of this project when we hit 5 million feet exposed, and I know we've passed that. You know, you have miniatures up to day 888. I mean, it's just, you know, they're insane numbers.
Nowhere do the numbers get bigger than at the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Looking back at the two towers, it was a force of 10,000 orcs that laid siege to Helm's Deep. In The Return of the King, the Dark Lord unleashes an army of 600,000 orcs.
What I love about Pelennor Fields is that I think a lot of people believe Peter brought it with Helm's Deep and he showed what he had, and they have no idea what is to come.
The magnitude of the trilogy's success makes it easy to forget what a huge risk it was to produce 3 big-budget films before the first movie had even opened.
Himself into Gandalf's robes, and Gandalf puts a hand on his shoulder.
There was a lot of water cooler kind of naysaying about these films, and more than a few terribly rude people were predicting that this would be, you know, the downfall of New Line.
Back up 2 years before the project came to New Line. That's when Peter Jackson had the thought maybe he could be the one to make The Lord of the Rings.
Down in New Zealand, we'd set up this little company called Weta, and we had like about 30 computers. And we were doing these ghost effects for this movie we were making. And it was a realization that we had arrived at a time when just about anything you could imagine was possible to put on film. That then led me to think, well, okay, if anything is possible, what has always been thought to have been impossible? And I thought The Lord of the Rings.
So Peter called his agent to inquire about the rights, which led to a series of events that culminated in the project being set up as a 2-picture deal at a Hollywood studio.
Provided with some aerodynamic kind of quality to send it up in the air, it would look quite good.
But just before the start of principal photography, the studio told Peter to condense the trilogy into one film or be replaced.
And at that point, the project was almost, 95% certain that it was officially dead.
Reminding them that he owned the scripts, Peter made an all-or-nothing bet with the studio. If he couldn't sell the project to another company within 3 weeks, he'd walk away without scripts or compensation.
When we started to look for other studios and tried to find somebody else, everybody turned us down.
Peter's last stop and final hope was New Line Cinema, where he showed a video presentation to studio head Bob Shaye.
It was animated storyboards, it was early CGI tests, it was interviews with various department heads, and it was just an absolutely comprehensive execution of vision. You could see clearly what the film was going to be. And when the sort of lights came up, Bob was sort of sitting there nodding and thinking, and first words out of his mouth were, "Aren't there 3 books? You should make 3.
For a moment, you think, what's he mean? What's he saying?
Peter didn't want to scare anyone away. And he was sort of, yeah, no, 3 would be good. 3 would be a good thing. That could certainly be a way to do it.
And that was it, That was like 5 minutes going from thinking we were never going to make these movies into now making 3 films.
With the full support of New Line co-chairman Michael Lynn and Bob Shaye, Peter and his co-writers launched into what was now a trilogy.
When I first heard there was going to be a movie made, I became terribly panicky because I thought, well, this is such an important book to me, and I couldn't imagine how anyone could bring that to life in a way that would satisfy me. And I'm sure a lot of other fans felt the same way.
Certainly, adapting the 1,200-plus page book was not an easy task.
It was difficult in the sense that it's a very complicated book that relies on a huge amount of backstory, which reads very much like a historical sort of volume. And that's fine for a book, but it's very hard to put into screen, except without it, you can't really tell the story properly. So how much detail we gave as opposed to how little detail we could get away with was very important. The multitude of characters is also difficult.
You've got to try and care about so many people for the different journeys that the individual characters are going on.
It was like this immense jigsaw puzzle that we had to somehow fit the pieces together and end up with something that felt like it was worthy of the title, The Lord of the Rings.
And what I think they've really achieved beautifully is the spirit of the book. One scene that really did that for me was when Frodo drops the ring.
Boromir, it is a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt over so small a thing. Boromir!
It encapsulated every character's reaction to the ring, Frodo's task as the ring bearer, and that nobody else could do it, and that the ring was such a dangerous object, and that men are frail. It did so many jobs in one very short space, and this is never done in the book.
Now, with the return of the king, Peter has completed his 8-year journey.
Why have you come?
Do you not know?
There's but a shadow and a doubt that you love.
Right, good. And I think on the day too, Miranda, those lines, "You cannot leave," and then "Do you not know?" has to be very vulnerable, a very vulnerable, soft line. It's sort of a very honest line. And then you feel...
Peter knew that casting would be key to the Lord of the Rings' success.
We were finding actors to represent some of the most beloved characters in history. So we felt that responsibility acutely, and we spent a lot of time trying to find people who just felt right. That we were literally said that we wanted our actors to feel like they stepped out of the pages of the book.
As he did in Heavenly Creatures, when he cast Kate Winslet in her first movie, Peter showed a knack for finding new talent.
I was coming to the end of my 3rd year at the Guildhall School in London, School of Music and Drama. So I read for Legolas, and I got offered the role just 2 days before I finished school.
And the other completely unrelated thing, which was also important, was that we wanted to make sure they were actually nice people, which sounds very silly, but they were people that we were going to have to work with for what has been 3 years. Unfortunately, in every case, we We were lucky. I mean, we got it right. They've been the most wonderful cast.
Excuse me. That man in the corner. Who is he?
He's one of them Rangers.
There was, however, one lead role that needed to be cast after the start of production.
He's known as Strider.
Just 3 days before the filming of Aragorn's first scene, Peter offered the part to Viggo Mortensen. The actor got on a plane the next day.
You know, I think the day that happened, fate was incredibly kind to us. It was a real turning point in hindsight. I mean, he's created a character that you cannot possibly imagine anybody else playing that role. He owns it 100%.
How do we know Frodo is alive?
What does your heart tell you?
Carrying the weight of the trilogy's central role was the youngest member of the cast, Elijah Wood.
Elijah's journey on these films has been a bit like Frodo's. He was 18 years old when we started, and he's 22 when we're finishing. And becoming an adult virtually during the course of the making of the films has very much mirrored Frodo's journey into adulthood himself.
I remember we were on the side of a mountain, and he came up to me before we did the first take, and he just said, "I want the look that you have on your face to scare the audience." And that horror, that deep sadness, all of the things that are going through Frodo's mind at that moment, that should be encapsulated in this one look.
The ring will come to him sooner or later. Even now, he's chasing it or hunting for it. He's suffered a defeat, yes, but behind the walls of Mordor, our enemy is regrouping. Bollocks.
When Peter cast Sir Ian McKellen as Gandalf, the actor had never read The Lord of the Rings.
But then he started to read, and he really became, you know, very quickly a Tolkien expert. And Ian would often walk on set clutching a copy of the book, you know, and he'd be sort of opening up to certain pages. He was really determined that Gandalf had to be the Gandalf that Tolkien wrote.
The experience of Lord of the Rings has rather confirmed what I already knew about the business of being an actor. It's reminded me and confirmed that this actor can't survive without a very good director.
One more take, and if you just give us some with a little bit more worry.
Peter cast Sean Astin in the pivotal role of Samwise Gamgee.
And then just as you go by it, the sun will come out and the bells.
His moment is really the return of the king. I mean, that's the case in the book, and it's very much the case in the film. It was frustrating because we were shooting some of these scenes in 1999. I remember after one day's shooting when Sean had been very emotional and tense and crying, and, you know, I just said to Sean, that's fantastic, that's absolutely amazing. And then I said, you realize it's going to be 4 years before anybody sees this.
In the summer of 2003, the cast gathered one last time for additional shooting on The Return of the King.
They've been like, you know, school reunions where we've all just got together and had a great time.
The fellowship, in a lot of ways, became a reality. It became a group of people who cared very much for each other, and in a lot of ways mirrored the journey of their characters.
I said to Elijah, I said, I don't even know what we're going to do when we wrap, because you just realize how important it is for people and how much of our lives it's taken over, you know.
On Return of the King, luckily, Tolkien wrote that Pippin becomes a Knight of Gondor, which means I get a right nice costume. And me and Dom have been fighting about this, actually. Who's got the best costume? We did ask about 6 or 7 of the girls that were around from wardrobe and makeup, and it was unanimous. It was mine was the best costume, and also that I looked the handsomest in it, and also the sexiest.
You don't go into something like this knowing that you're gonna have such strong friendships formed.
That's Viggo's last shot, everybody.
But that is the case, and so it will be kind of bittersweet having to let it go, but, you know, let it go we must.
Evil is stirring in Mordor. The ring has awoken.
What must I do?
Half a century after the books were published, 25 years after Peter Jackson first read them, and 6 years since his meeting at New Line Cinema launched one of the biggest projects in Hollywood history, the filmmaker's journey has come to an end. Now, like all movies, the Lord of the Rings trilogy belongs to the audience.
Fly, you fools!
I think we're living in a very cynical age, and I think this is not a cynical story. This is a story that loyalty and honesty and dignity and courage are things that are more important than money, ambition, greed.
I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. A promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. And I don't mean to. I don't mean to.
Certainly the way that we've treated it has been to treat it with complete realism and complete reality, and really focusing on the heart and the soul of these characters in the story.
I will not risk open war.
Open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not. That's what's interesting, and that's what will last. I mean, 50 years from now, there'll be some special effects that may or may not seem dated. It won't really matter because the emotional through line, the truthfulness, is what will last.
The battle for Helm's Deep is over. The battle for Middle-earth is about to begin.
What you find in these movies, and Return of the King especially, is its basic human emotional stuff, if you like. It's friendship, it's courage, it's loyalty, it's love. What's at its essence is the most simple themic material possible, and I think that's why it touches people.
A day may come when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship, but it is not this day. This day, we fight!
Peter Jackson's film is a work of a brilliant storyteller, and that's why these films have been as popular as the books have been and continue to be.